Hello, everyone, and welcome to the broadcast. I'm your host, Tammy, and with me, as always, are my beautiful co-hosts, Ash and Suze. Ladies, how are you tonight?
I'm wonderful.
I am excellent, as
I was
always.
waiting for somebody to say excellent.
I got that covered all the time.
Dave, are you there?
Yeah, okay, I'll take great. Great.
You're not sweet and sour pork this week?
I've never used great, so I'll take great.
I almost used great.
So with us tonight, we have a very special guest. Her name is Michelle, and her and I started talking when she reached out to me about some human trafficking stuff. And as we kind of got talking, she shared some details about her life that, just in talking with her, I thought were very important and something that should be shared. So I asked her if she would be willing to come on and talk with us on the podcast, and she agreed. And so tonight we have Michelle with us. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, Michelle.
Thank you. Hi.
Michelle.
Hello.
Hello.
So, Michelle, you have a very, very important story to tell. And we want to kind of just give you the run of the podcast to tell it. So I'm going to let you maybe just start from the beginning. And, as you kind of just tell us your story, we'll probably just interject with our questions and things like that. But I think it's important just to start from the beginning.
Okay, I'm going to do my best. Like I told you earlier, I'm very nervous, and just for a couple reasons. I mean, when you come onto something like this, you leave yourself wide open, and as you all know, the internet has trolls, and so it's very stressful. And the second part is I really want to do a good job explaining and bringing awareness to the missing and murdered and trafficking. And so I'm hoping to do a good job, but I'm just going to introduce myself to everyone out there. I am a Cree Métis woman from Alberta. I'm 55 years old, and I was born to a Cree Métis man and an Irish-Scottish woman, fiery redhead. My dad was an alcoholic. He suffered generational trauma, and his parents, my grandparents, they died of alcohol-related disease. My mother was a wild one. And anyways, they had 5 kids. There was 5 of us, and my father was abusive, and he had beaten her half to death, like many times. And she finally left him, took all us kids, and ran away to Edmonton. He came back and got her. Anyway, there was a lot of back and forth with them. And she finally left him for good, and unfortunately started doing drugs and prostituting herself. And so we were shuffled around a lot, and she brought us back to Vancouver from Edmonton, and she got involved with this man, Howie McEnroy, and she was living in this house in Vancouver, and like the craziest thing, Howie, she had left us in the care of a 17-year-old, and Howie had come to her house and got the 17-year-old, and they went and committed a murder, left us kids alone in the house. It's like all the court documents are there, and like we were just really little. I'm just like sharing this to explain how we grew up, and we were little, and they had this guy in the back of the car with a crossbow pointed at him, and they came back to the house to check on us kids, right? How nice of them. And then went on to murder this man. And so my mom, she had written a letter, and the police intercepted it. And so she had to go to this trial, and she became scared. And so she grabbed all us kids and moved us back to Edmonton. It was just a lot. Like my mom, she was a drug addict, and she moved us into a motel. And my aunt said that we wouldn't shower or bathe for weeks, and she would come and try to take care of us and at this motel in Edmonton. And there was just a lot of neglect. We were hungry a lot. My mom, our house was always filled with, or whatever hotel we were at, or when we finally got a house, there was always like bank robbers, drug addicts. It was just crazy. And so my mom, she finally got a place in a low income housing in Edmonton. And we were kind of happy there. Like we were like little wolves. We stuck together. We looked after each other. There was never parents. My mom frequented a bar called the York Hotel, and she didn't care. It could be winter. And if she wanted her drugs, she would pack all us kids in the car, and she would barely have gas. She would park in the parking lot of the most dangerous bar in Edmonton, leave all us kids out there, and she'd go in and wait for her dealer. We'd be out there. She'd come out every once in a while, start the car so we could warm up, then go back in. And like every drug addict, everyone knew who us kids were. They'd come bang on the window. How you kids doing? Like there was nothing horrible about leaving us out there in this parking lot, right?
Oh, wow.
So it was a lot. And this was basically our whole life. But we moved into this low income housing. And it was there that I first got molested. I've been molested a couple times there, but there was a high profile case in Edmonton about a man that his daughter went missing. And I don't even know if I should mention the name, but his daughter went missing years later. But I was babysitting for them. They had an apartment complex across the way, and I used to go babysit. One of the neighbors I knew, this girl I knew, her name was Bibbs. She used to babysit for them, and then all of a sudden she stopped, and she didn't want to look after the kids anymore. And like I was only 10 or 11, you don't wonder why. You're just like, oh. And she's like, do you want to go look after these kids? And I was like, sure. And so I did that a couple times, and then they asked me to go to Sylvan Lake with them and to watch their kids. And my mom, she was at the bar all the time. She didn't care where we were. She was like, sure, she can go. And I went there, and I remember they parked the van and they were partying in this house. And I was in the van with the kids, and the kids were sleeping. And then the mom was in there partying, and the dad came out, and he crawled into the van, and he was checking on the kids, and he started molesting me. And I was so scared. And he was drunk, and I was trying to push him off me, and I was crying, and he wouldn't stop. And then I kept pushing, and I started getting louder. And so he stopped, and he started laughing at me, and then he went back in the house. And that was my first experience of being molested. And I came back when they brought us back. I didn't tell anyone because I was scared of him. Like he was a biker and he was a big guy, and I was scared. So I didn't tell anyone. And I just kind of went on with life. And then years later, his daughter went missing, like 6 years later, and she was only 7. And I didn't say anything because by then I was like 14 or 15, and I was already completely enmeshed in the street life, right? I should have gone to the police and told them what happened to me, because they still haven't caught her killer or whoever took her. But I never did, because I was like, by then I was on the streets myself. So, but that was my first experience. And then living in that low income housing, like we had a horrible life. We looked after each other. We were just like a little band of wild wolves, I guess you can say. Um, we weren't happy there, and I ran away with my best friend. And I remember we went to Lac La Biche, and we ran away on the Greyhound. And I think I was 10 or 11, and she was about 11. So we got on the bus, the Greyhound bus, and we went to see her friends and her family there. And one of her cousins, he was older. He had we got to know the town. We went through the town, and then he asked us if we wanted to go see his grandpa's cabin out in the woods, right? And we were like, whatever, right? Let's go have fun. And so we got in his van, and we started driving out, and he's taken us way, way out to this like little woods, this little cabin out in the woods. And, we thought nothing, we were having fun. And then he parked there and we got out and we went and saw the cabin. It was really creepy. And I forget how old he was. He was like 19 or 20 or something, right? And when we got back in the van, he offered us a beer. I didn't want one. We didn't take the beer. And he basically started telling us we had to caulk it or walk it. Right. And I'd never heard that term before. Like, we were just young. And then, it started becoming clear that what he wanted from us. And we got scared. We jumped out of the van. It was pitch black out there. And he started calling us names and he drove off. And we were walking down this, like, just dirt road, pitch black, just the moon. And we were so scared. And I guess he must have thought, because like everyone knew we went with him. So I guess he got nervous and he came back and got us. And when we got back to her aunt's house, we went to the police. And my mom had to come and pick us up all the way from Edmonton to Lac La Biche. And I remember I had to ask my mom when I was writing the book, because I couldn't remember if it was Lac La Hache or Lac La Biche. We were really young. And she told me it was Lac La Biche, and she remembers it like yesterday, right? So those were the experiences I had so young with being molested. And like I said, like my mom, our life in the low income housing, it was horrible. And we did have some friends there, and funny story, we didn't know, because my mom took us from our dad when we were very young, and we didn't even know we were First Nations. Like, my mom is white. And I remember when we first moved into the low income housing there, we came running inside because we were fighting with the kids next door. And we said to my mom, we were like, those Indians next door. And she started laughing, and we were like, what is so funny? And she said, you are the Indians next door. And then, like, I'm the one that looks the most First Nations in my family. We honestly look like the United Nations, but I start suffering a little. We do. My brother looks Italian. My sister looks Spanish. My other brother looks white. One of my sisters looks, but you could never tell. I'm the one that looks the most. And I suffered in school because, I got called a squaw and a teepee creeper. And if you don't know, Alberta is very prejudiced against Native people. Like, I've never found that here in BC, but both in Calgary and Alberta, there's a lot of prejudice towards First Nations people, and they are very, very out in the open about it. And luckily here in BC, and I've been here for a very long time, since I was 18 and left on Grouse Mountain for dead, I have been here. And I haven't had to experience, but even going back to Calgary for a while, I went to treatment there, and it is really bad. Wow. So, yeah. So anyway, to keep on with the story, my mom came and got me, and I went back home. And my mom, in this time, she had met this African-American man from Nova Scotia, and she started dating him. And, all was well, I guess, as well as it could be with a prostitute, drug addicted mother. But somehow I think they didn't pay the rent, or we got kicked out of there. And then we just started moving around a lot. And we ended up going to, what is it? Mill Creek, or not Mill Creek. Anyway, we moved all over Edmonton. And by time I was about 13 years old, like, things were bad. My mom was a T's and R's drug addict, and our life was insane. It was always the getting of the drugs. There was always alcohol. There was a lot of abuse between her and my stepdad. He would beat her up. I can still hear her screams in my head, right? So we'd moved over to the north side, and we were living in a townhouse, and I was sleeping downstairs. I had a room downstairs, and I was sleeping there one night, and I woke up, and my stepdad was molesting me. He had his hands down my pants, and I freaked out. I started yelling and screaming, and I told him to get off of me. And I told my mom, when she got up, and she mostly acted like she didn't believe me, but she made darn sure I didn't tell anybody. And the one thing I forgot to tell you about my mom trained us since we were little. Since we were old enough to talk, we were old enough to know not to talk to anybody. You don't tell anybody our business. You don't talk to the police. The police are bad. She instilled in us from a young age, don't be a rat, don't talk to anybody. You know, my mom was a professional shoplifter, and when we were little, she used to take us kids, and what she'd do is, like, we go to IGA or something, and she'd take a shopping cart and she'd make us kids stand in front of the shopping cart, and she'd fill her bags with meat. And she had been arrested with us. And that's the thing. We have been failed by social services across 2 provinces, right? Across Alberta and here. But so she got caught shoplifting, and the police came and they just took us upstairs to the IGA. And my mom did what she always does. She phoned a relative, and I'm making quotation marks, like a relative. It was just our drug addicted aunt, or so she called herself, our aunt. And they would just come and get us. And like, no ministry ever got involved. And I must say, I have these 2 beautiful aunts, my Aunt Sue and my Aunt Maureen. And all through when my mom was dragging us through all the abuse, my aunts, they would call the ministry on her. They would get social services. And back then they didn't have computers. So what my mom would do is she would just like move us and go to another social services office to get her checks for us. And you know, she'd just run away, and they didn't connect because they didn't have the computers to connect or find out. So my aunts tried so hard to save us. And my one aunt, when she was like 18 years old, she told me she used to give my mom and her boyfriend money, whatever boyfriend my mom was with at the time. She used to give them money so they could feed us kids. And she was only like 18 or 19. But instead of feed us kids, they take the money and go get drugs and alcohol. So she said what she started doing is she had a job, and she would, when she got her lunch hour, she would quickly go get groceries and bring it to us kids to make sure we ate. Like, they tried so hard to save us children.
Wow.
And but my mom, she would just run off with us. She did not care. So yeah, and another thing, like I said, I'm going to backtrack a lot because, you know, there's just so much. But my mom, before she got with my stepdad that molested me, she was with this pimp, and his name was Roy Mays. And he was very violent. He would beat the hell out of her. He would beat us up. And I remember one time, my siblings and I talk about this a lot. We were living in Edmonton at the time, and one of us had broke the downstairs toilet. And now we were like a little pack, us kids. So we wouldn't tell him which one of us did it, right? Because we weren't going to tattle on each other. And so he lined us up and he beat us with an electrical cord. He beat us badly.
Wow.
And you know, the thing was, and we talk about this a lot, it wasn't even of course it was painful being beat with an electrical cord, but the worst part of the whole experience is he lined us up so the sibling had to listen, like wait in the lineup, and we could hear the screams of the sibling before us, right? And so that has stayed with all of us. Just the horror of having to hear your brother or sister getting beat and knowing you were next. Anyway, he ended up some years later, my mom finally left him. He beat her so badly. But some years later, he was stabbed to death on Hastings Street, you know, kind of, and this is horrible to say, but fitting end for a very violent man. But this was our little lives, right? This was what we grew up. And so I just thought I'd add that in. But to go back to after I was molested by my stepdad, so I was about 13 years old. And then my mom said she didn't believe me. And it hit me then. Like, I always knew we had a really bad life. Like, mom would take us. There was this drug dealer, and his name was Avery Broadbent. And he had these 2 fortresses in Edmonton. They were so secure that the police would take battering rams. They couldn't get in. This man was in love with my mom. And my mom used to take us in these drug houses. And one time they had to bring us in there because she was going to kill herself. And she was in there and she didn't want to come out. So they got us kids and they brought us in this. And when we walked by, there was people like with their arms tied off, needles in their arm. And by the time we got to my mom, she was laying on a dirty mattress, like the grossest mattress with no sheet. She has false teeth, so her false teeth were half sticking out of her head. And I thought she was dead. But these are the things we saw. And we were little kids, and little children should never, ever see things like that, right? So, but anyway, to go back to at the age of 13, and then like I knew we'd been through some bad stuff, but that was the first time ever I felt when she said she didn't believe me and when she did nothing about it, that was like literally the first time that I knew that I was in an ocean with no life jacket and nobody was coming to save me. And that was a hard one, right? That was really hard because, you know, kids should be protected. And I knew then. And then I just started getting angry. And so I stayed because I had nowhere to go. And there was no resources for children like us. So, but I turned 14 and I did what any 14-year-old would do. I ran away. And I ran away to Millwoods. My stepbrother had lived there. And I told him what happened, but that's his father. So he didn't really know how to handle that. But he was at this party house. They had a place where everyone would just go to party. And that's where I stayed. But my mom kept saying she was going to send the police there to get me. But I didn't want to come home. You know, I was completely lost. And I just want to add, like, I was super innocent before my dad molested me. I mean, I smoked a little pot and I smoked cigarettes, but I didn't ever have relationships with men. I was a virgin when he did that. And so and I'm only adding this part because it's deeply personal, but I'm only adding this part because I think it's important to say that, like, I was a virgin and I went to my brother's and where all his friends were, and I just picked the nicest guy there and I decided to get that over with. And that's the way I felt, to get my virginity over with, because at that point, I just felt like, after being molested 3 times, I just felt like there's no way in bloody hell anyone's going to take that from me. So I just did what I did just to get it out of the way and not have it taken from me, because that's all I knew of grown men, right? Is that they were going to do bad things. So, you know, like, I didn't know if I was going to add that part, but I think it's important to know, because this is how victims feel, like anything that has to do with that type of thing. It's just a hard one. Anyway, my mom made me come back. She forced me to come back to the house. And my brother and his friends couldn't keep me there anymore because they didn't want the police coming. So I did go back and I started sneaking out the window and going to the nightclub with one of my friends, right? So in Edmonton, you know, it didn't matter. I was 14 years old, but if you just wore a cute dress and you walked in with a shitload of confidence, you got into the bars there. The drinking age is 18, but we got in everywhere, right? And so my friend and I, we went to one of the nightclubs, and there was this man there, and he was half black and he was really handsome. And I swear he was a predator, and he could smell the wounds from way across the club, right? Like, I was bleeding everywhere. You could tell, like, I was lost. And he swooped right in. And, you know, it sounds crazy, but when you're 14 and this handsome man is buying you champagne and sympathizing with you and whining and dining you, like, I fell right in love. I thought that this man was just the greatest thing. And he was so good looking, and imagine he liked me, right? And so 14, I was just starstruck. And anyway, he would phone me and I'd sneak out and meet him all the time. He'd park a couple blocks up from my mom's house and I would go run to him. And his best friend was doing the same thing with my best friend. And And then they told us they wanted to take us to Calgary. We were going to go have fun and we were going to party in Calgary, right? And we were excited. Woohoo, we're going to go have fun. And I tell you, they took us to Calgary and we were there 2 days and they had put us on the corner. And
Oh, wow.
we were
Wow.
yeah, we were scared to death. But, we were like, okay. And like Royce, that was the pimp, Royce Briscoe, that got me, right? He had me believing that we were just going to do this and then we were going to start a business. And like, he really conned me. He's a professional at this. He loved me and this was just temporary and we were going to save money and we were going to start a business. I'm 14. I believed anything, right? I just wanted to believe anything. I want to believe someone could love me. Like, our childhood was horrific. I just wanted someone to love me. So I did believe him. But then, and I was so scared and it was so disgusting. Like, the first time that I got in that car and I went in that hotel room and I cried and I cried and I thought, I can't do this, right? But I did. And then my best friend, she ran back home, but she had a home to run to. She had parents that loved her. For her, she was just coming to party and she had a home to, I had nothing. So I stayed and I stayed with Royce and I stayed on those streets. And Royce increasingly became controlling and violent, of course. And I stayed with him though. And then one time I was in a hotel room in Calgary and it was like 14 stories up and all the working girls stayed there and we brought our clients there and stuff like that. And Royce said he had to go back to Edmonton. Of course, he had other girls working for him, which I didn't know till later, but he had to go back to Edmonton. He had to take care of some things. So I stayed in Calgary by myself and I worked for a few days and I made a lot of money, right? 14 years old, all the perverts and weirdos out there. Of course, I made a lot of money. So I told myself it was okay to go shopping, right? Because I wanted to go shopping. So that's what I did. And he came back and he lost his bloody mind. He saw that I bought new clothes. He beat me half to death. He hung me halfway out of 14th story. He hung me out the window. And when he was finished, and then I pulled out all the rest of the money I had, and he saw how much money I made, and it was a lot. And then, of course, he felt bad, and he sat on the edge of the bed, and he started his crocodile tears and said he was so sorry. And by then, I was 16 years old. I'd been with him all this time, right? But 15 or 16. But he was so sorry and that he was never going to do it again. But like, he had done it before and not to that extent. But that was it for me. I gave him a hug and I held him for a bit and I told him it was okay. And as soon as he left, I ran away. I left all my clothes. I left everything because I thought he might be watching the hotel and I was terrified. But I left. And I swore I was never going home again, but that's exactly where I went. I went back to my mom's house and then I got back there and I was unhappy. And by then I had become very violent myself. I was a fighter to begin with. I grew up in low income housing. I'm part Native. All there was to do was fight, right? So I was quite the little fighter. But then I just kept getting worse. And then one night I went to the after hours thinking the whole Royce situation was over, right? So I was 16, I think 15 or 16, and I was like drinking in the after hours, thinking nothing of it. And all of a sudden, Royce came in. He grabbed me by the back of the hair. He dragged me out of Sugar's after hours, dragged me down the stairs. He had some guys watching the door. He had his trunk open, and he threw me in the trunk of his car. And he drove me out to a potato field, and I broke a couple toes trying to kick to get out. And then he drove me there, and he told me he loved me, and he was sorry, and I went back. Because well, for one thing, I was scared. And for another thing, I didn't really have anywhere else to go. And the hardest part about all of this is that, they didn't have any resources for girls like me. I had a grade 7 education. I had nowhere to go. There was no resources. And I just saw no hope, right? I saw no hope. And anyway, I was back and forth with Royce, and then I decided to finally leave, and he went to Toronto. And I left and I hid out for a long time. But all in this time, I was still sneaking out and working the streets, right? And I cannot even tell you the violent encounters that I had just getting in those cars. Like these pimps, they want you to, they try to get you to believe that they're there for protection, right? But the only thing they ever protect you from is other pimps, because when you get in that car, when you go in that hotel room, you're all alone and you're at the mercy of whatever weirdo picks you up, right? But the pimps will have you believe. That's why they call it the game. It's like a game to them. They know that they're not protecting you. And they're all friends, right? So they'll be like, oh, I'm protecting you from this pimp. Meanwhile, they're like best friends. And also, Royce, I did not know, but he was bisexual. So all the time that he had all these girls, he was also having relationships with men, which I did not know about until later on in life. And a lot of them are like that. A lot of the pimps out there, especially, like I've heard of 2 or 3 of them that are also bisexual, right? It's just, it's a horrible thing.
Michelle, I just want to stop you there for a second. Royce, have you looked into him much since? Because he was actually arrested not long ago.
Oh, I didn't even know that. Well, I know that in Stanley Park, he had a shootout with some actual friends of mine, and he had shot Ruggie Ragbeer in the throat, and he had murdered Billy Boucher Zeta. These were friends of mine, but they were also pimps, and he murdered them. And I know there was a news article about him, that him and another pimp had kidnapped some working girl in Toronto and held her against her will.
Yeah,
So,
in combination with a woman named Penny Roberts.
oh, was that is recent? I haven't really looked into him a lot. I looked into him a bit when I was writing my book. He was a very violent man. And yeah.
Yeah, it looks like it happened back in well, the trial, anyways, was in May of 2000, and the man that he was arrested with, his name is, well, last name is Patterson, Gary Wayne Gabriel Patterson.
Yeah, I think I read that one. Like, I don't know that man, but I do know Royce, and Royce was extremely violent.
Yeah, it looks
Yeah.
like he was helping him with what seemed to be a much bigger human trafficking scheme, and all of them were arrested, and I don't know if they'd still be in jail, but did face jail time as a result. Anyways,
Yeah.
I didn't want to interrupt your story, but I just thought that was, it's interesting that he's still around and
Yeah, well,
still doing this stuff.
I've heard so many things about him. I heard that he got AIDS, and then I heard that he got addicted to crack. Like, I've heard many things about Royce. All I know is that he made my life hell, and the whole time he made my life hell, he had me somehow believing that he loved me, right? And it's just so funny how they can take someone and just play on all of their insecurities and that's what he did with me. And at the same time, have me believe that he had my best interest at heart. Like, they are professionals at this type of stuff. Like, people say, oh, how does this happen? Well, you know how this happens. You take a broken little girl and you make her promises, and it does happen, and people don't understand, and they think girls are stupid. No, girls are just lonely, and they don't have anywhere else to go. And then after I finally got away from Royce, I kept working because I didn't know anything else. I had never had a job. I had a grade 7 education. There was no programs for girls like me. The ministry doesn't give a damn. They never helped us. They didn't care. You had to either be half dead of starvation or beaten to death for them to actually take your kids. Now they take kids for any reason, but back then, no way. they did not care. And so in my little mind, I had nowhere to turn. So I kept working, but then I kept getting harassed by pimps, right? Because they were like, you can't be out here. You don't got a man. And I was like, oh my God. So I met this guy, and he seemed nice, and he was African American from the States, and he actually was a really nice guy, but of course, like, he was pimp. So what do you do? But I did go with him, and I went to Vancouver with him for a while, and I got pregnant, and he didn't want a baby. He had all these kids in the States and in Canada, and he did not want a baby. So I left him. I wasn't very nice to him. He was like 6'6", and I used to get mad and lash out at him. Right? He took a lot from me. I was very violent by that time because I was so tired of, I'd been beaten half to death more times than I can count, and by then I just started fighting back, and I was drinking a lot. And I was a very violent drunk. And but anyway, I decided I was going to have the baby. And I went back to Edmonton, and I was like 17 at that time. And I had to go live with my mom because I didn't, and my stepdad that had molested me because I didn't have anywhere else to go. And so I went back, and we were all in this wee little apartment in Edmonton. And I had my baby, and then I tried so hard. I got on the ministry, and I told myself, I was like, I'm going to do it. Like, I had this beautiful little baby, and he was like native black and white, and his eyes, and he was just so beautiful. And I look at his little face, and I'm like, I can do this. Like, I'm going to be a good mom, and everything's going to change. Right. But by then I was drinking a lot, and I had so many issues, and like, I was just, but I wanted to be his mom, and I wanted to do a good job. And so anyway, I went on the ministry, and I got some help financially, but I could never make ends meet. I was always running out of diapers and milk. And, I was sad, and I would look, and I'm like, I can't do this. And so I, of course, did the only thing I knew, and I went back on the streets, right? And I went back to work. And again, I'm 17, turning 18, and the pimps started bugging me again. They would roll up on me on the streets. They would jump out. They would threaten me. They'd tell me they're going to kidnap me, and I had to have a man. So I ended up finding another pimp, and he was another American, and he was super nice. And he was really kind to me. And I know everyone's like, man, are you crazy? Like, he's pimp, right? But in the circumstances I was in, I didn't have a whole lot of choice. Because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. And so anyway, he took me out of Edmonton, and we decided to go to Victoria. So we went to Victoria, and he was super nice. I took my live-in sitter with me. She disappeared without a trace, but I'll get into that later. So Michelle Harmer, she's a missing person in Edmonton. She was my live-in sitter. And so she came along with us, and I was slowed down on the drinking. And, we went to Vancouver. Then we decided to go to Victoria. And so I was working in Victoria, but I wasn't yet 18. Anyway, the police started harassing me a bit. And so we decided, well, let's hop back over the water and go to Vancouver, and I'll work there because it's bigger and the police aren't going to harass me as much. And I just turned 18 then, I think. Anyway, so we went to Vancouver, and I worked in the daytime a lot. Sometimes I'd work day and night, but we decided we loved Vancouver. My live-in sitter, there was my pimp, my live-in sitter, my son, and myself. And so we decided we were going to stay there. And we went and got in North Vancouver, we decided to get a kitchen unit, so it was more apartment-like, and that I was going to work more because I wanted to save up enough to get a nice apartment, get all the furniture needed. So I was going to work in the daytime, right? So I went to work one afternoon, and I was out there, and it was like 2:00 in the afternoon or something. And this guy came, and he walked up, and he said, listen, I don't want anyone. This was on Seymour and Helmicon, right? And he said, I don't I don't want anyone to see me driving my car around here. So is it okay if we just walk to the parkade? And I thought that makes sense. Okay. Like he doesn't want anyone to see him picking up a working girl. So, I didn't have any red flags. I was just like, okay, So off we went. And then when we got to the parkade downtown Vancouver, I saw his car and the window was smashed out and there was like plastic over one of the windows. And my little voice, there was a little voice inside that said, Michelle, don't get in the car. Don't do it. But he told me, I said, what's going on with this here? Like, why is the window like that? And he said, oh, well, the window broke and then it was raining and I didn't want the rain to get in. So I haven't had time to get it fixed. And the little voice again, but I'm like 18. I want money. I want to get a place. And I'm like, so I ignored that little voice. And they say that we have this we have that inner voice, that little alarm that starts going off. And I totally ignored it. And I got in the car and I told him because my hotel was in North Van. I thought, well, we might as well just go to North Van and rent a room by where I'm at. That way I'll be almost home anyway, saves on cab fare. And anyway, it all made sense to me. So we're driving up to North Van and he went past where he was supposed to turn off. And I said to him, and like he was just this little guy, and I said to him, I said, oh, you missed the turnoff, right? And then he was like, oh, okay, I guess I did. And then he acted like, he pulled over for a minute, like he was getting his bearings and he was going to turn around. And all of a sudden I turned my head and a fist smashed right into me. And then before I knew it, the seatbelt was around my neck and he had me pinned between the dashboard and the seat. And the last thing I remember was blacking out with his face right in my face and the seatbelt around my neck. And so I woke up and I came to, and the pain was shooting through my face. And he saw that I had come to, and the seatbelt went back around my neck, or he'd strangled me with his hands at that point. And he had raped me, he had strangled me, and then he got me out of the car and I was on Grouse Mountain. He took me up to Grouse Mountain and he had, I guess by that point, pulled me out of the car. And I had been strangled twice. I don't know if it was his fist that broke my jaw or what. But he started kicking me, and they said in the report that, I had bruises all over my body from kicks and blows. And then I also had gravel marks from him dragging me across, because it was a gravel pit. It was like a gravel thing where the parking is to go up to the tram for Grouse Mountain. And so apparently he thought he had murdered me. And they say, whoever did that newspaper article that they had for me, they got it wrong. They got it wrong. For one thing, they said he threw me down an embankment. That was no embankment. It was a ravine. I had to crawl a lot to get out of there, but I was buck naked. He had dragged me across, and I believe he thought I was dead because he threw me down in the ravine, and then he started throwing rocks and brush over what he thought was my body. One of the rocks hit my head and fractured my skull. And then, and I don't know how long I was down there, but I came to, and I was in pain, but all I could think of was my son, right? And I started crawling up, and I remember all I could see, because my jaw was off my face, and all I could see was blood dripping on the leaves. So I'm crawling up there, and all I remember is the blood all over the leaves. And every time I get the blood all over the grass and the leaves. And I crawled up there and I got myself out of the ravine. I'm 18, right? I just it's hard to wrap my head around, because I'm 55 now. It's like I'm not even that person, but for an 18-year-old to go through something like that. And then I had gotten up to the gravel part and I fell and I passed out. And some people, an elderly couple, from my understanding, they were taking the tram. They wanted to go up and see Grouse Mountain. They were going up to the Sky Tram, and they found me buck naked there. They didn't want to be identified because, of course, they were scared. They didn't know what was going on. And they had called the police. And so, the next thing I know, I'm in the hospital, and my mom, she'd come up from Edmonton, my crazy drug addicted mother, and for the first time in my life, I was actually happy to see her. And but she had come in the hospital, and they told her what room I was in. Like, back then I had hair extensions. I took good care of myself. And they told her what room I was in, and she walked in the room, and she walked back out, and she said, "My daughter's not in that room." And they're like, "Yeah, your daughter's in that room." I guess my face, because they had to stitch up the side of my mouth. I had steel plates in my jaw. I had wires on my jaw. My face was bloated and bruised. They had to cut the hair extensions out of my hair because to put stitches in. And my mom didn't recognize me. Like, I was that bad. I was that badly beaten that she didn't recognize her own daughter.
Wow.
Right. And so this man, Joseph Hammond, so my attack was on May 30th, 1987. And I really do believe that he was angry that he was unable to kill me. Like, it bothered him. And it wasn't until years later, but there was this beer vendor, and her name's Christina Thompson. I think she was 20 years old. And she was at Wreck Beach, and she was doing her beer vending thing, and she was well loved. Everybody knew her. In fact, she's an urban legend now. They say her ghost haunts Wreck Beach. But anyway, she was on Wreck Beach, and she was with her boyfriend, and they had gotten in a fight. And so I guess this Joseph Hammond, that with my attempted murder, he was watching, and he watched her get in a fight with her boyfriend. And then she stormed off, and she had her beer, and she was heading up the trail, and he caught up to her, and he offered to help her carry her beer up. And of course, she's like, sure. And she never made it to the top. He killed her, he strangled her, and then he hung around and had sex with her corpse twice.
Oh my God.
On trail number 6, she still has a headstone there. She's still, like, they put a headstone up there for her. And people say, like, I've read urban legends. Some of them have been scrubbed from the internet, but people say that they've seen her ghost walking. You know how urban legends go, and that they can hear a woman screaming sometimes at the nighttime there. So this poor, beautiful soul, and he murdered her. And then, so he murdered her August 1993. So it was years after he tried to murder me. And then he turned himself in with his priest, which was like the strangest thing. I think I had that written down. I don't know where I put it. But anyway, he did turn himself in with his priest years later. It was 11 years after my attack that he had turned himself in with his priest. And by then, like, I had full-blown post-traumatic stress. I used to sleep with knives under my pillow. I was like, after my attack on Grouse Mountain, I had turned to drugs. I got a crack addiction. I lost my son to the ministry. Like, I was a mess, right? It was like I was just kept drinking and drugging. I was trying to stuff the wounds with drugs and alcohol, but I was bleeding out all over the place. I had lost my son. I'd given up hope, right? But and then I forgot to mention, like, the police did come every couple of years to see if I remembered anything about my attack, because after Grouse Mountain, I blocked the man's face. I can remember the entire attack, but I had blocked Joseph Hammond's face. I don't know if that was protection, but I couldn't see his face. I could remember what happened to me, but I couldn't identify him. So every once in a while, they put me under hypnosis. That didn't work. Like, whatever blocks I put up, they were firmly in place. But I remember one night I had a dream, And in my dream, I still had my jaws wired there then, but in my dream, the doorbell rang and I looked through the peek hole and I could see his face. And in my dream, I knew his face, but when I woke up, the blocks were back. Like I couldn't remember what he looked like. And so they kept coming to check every couple years. Did I remember anything? But I don't think they were really trying to find him. I don't think they were at all. But and I did do a newspaper article with one of the either Global or something. But they were more interested in the pimps and stuff and my lifestyle than in what actually happened. Right? It was the strangest thing. But yeah, so anyway, he murdered Christina Thompson and then turned himself in with a priest, and that's when I got notified that my assailant had finally turned himself in. And when he turned himself in, I remember when I was going to court and the investigating officer, he said that Joseph Hammond had written me a letter, and in order for the letter to be admissible to court, that I had to read it, right? It had to be read by me. And so he sent me this letter, and in the letter he wrote that, oh, I'm sorry for what I did to you, but, you should be happy because unlike the other girl, you survived. And I was like,
Wow.
are
Whoa.
you kidding me? Like, that is the level of sickness this man had. And I remember when I did go to court, there was this lady, I think her name was Maria D'Angelo, and she did the most horrible story on me. And she used my full name, which I didn't know if it was legal because I was underage at the time of the attack. But every second word was prostitute. And I was like, oh my God, what if my son ever sees this, right? So that's why, Tammy, when I sent you the newspaper article, I blacked out all the words that said prostitute and how much was charged because this Maria D'Angelo, she thought that was important to put all this in this article. And I was so ashamed of it, right? Because by then I was off the streets and I was super ashamed. But this was a very, very sick man and turned himself in with this priest. And I don't know where he is. I've been trying to find out like when he's up for parole, and they're trying to put me through all this red tape with it. And it's quite crazy. But then, even then, after all that happened, and I was 18 and I was left on Grouse Mountain for dead, you'd think I would quit. But then I kept doing the drugs. But after that, and I had a crack addiction and I was drinking, and my mom was still, a big T's and R's addict, and I had to go live with her. And okay, so this going on to molestation. So she was still with my stepdad, my pedophile stepdad, right? So anyway, here I am with my jaws wired. I had to, my mom and them, they moved up here to be with me after I got left on Grouse Mountain. And of course, she brought my stepdad that molested me. And I didn't know it at the time, but another family member he had molested got sent away instead of before my molestation. So my mom was well aware of his pedophilia. She was, and she did nothing. And then, so anyway, I was 18 after the Grouse Mountain thing. I had to live with them. And then he found another family member victim. I'm not saying who it is because their stories are not mine to tell. But I will just say that at that point, when this other family member was molested by him, I'd had enough. I went to the police. And I went to the police and the ministry out here, and they were looking for him, and he went on the run. And of course, my mother, like a dutiful little drug addict, she protected him and she hid him. And so the ministry was involved, and then they did nothing. They did nothing. They said, oh, well, we looked for him for a while, and then they did nothing. They didn't check up on us kids again. They didn't check to see if we were okay. I don't ever recall them following up on any of it. right? And so, that was so frustrating. Like the ministry here in Alberta, like I keep telling my brothers and sisters, like we were literally failed across 2 provinces, right? And the second, the person, the family member that was assaulted was 15 years old at the time.
Oh my gosh.
Right? So you would think that the ministry would follow up, the police would follow up, but I don't remember them ever doing it. And then we found out later in life, because we just recently tried to, there was a whole blowout. So I want to explain something. Like we all had Stockholm syndrome. My mom was the victim from hell. She taught us to never talk about our abuse. She taught us to never talk about her stealing. Everything we were taught at a very young age. As soon as we were old enough to talk, we were old enough to lie, right? And she would make sure we all felt sorry for her all the time. We all had Stockholm syndrome, and I never thought that was real, but when it hit us, that's what happened, because she was like, protect me. And we did. She made us believe like we couldn't live without her. She kept our little family together, and that without her, what would happen to us? And she had spent our whole lives brainwashing us, and we didn't even see it until somehow we snapped out of it when we were older, right? So anyway, we found out later, like with all like his charges for molestation and what happened, they just decided that they couldn't find him, so they stayed the charges. Like 6 years after they couldn't find him, my mom hid him and then got back together with us and made us look at him every single holiday if we wanted to see her.
What?
Wow.
Yeah, she did. She stayed with him.
Gosh.
And we don't even know why we did it, but it's part of Stockholm syndrome. My mom would make it all like it was normal and like, oh, she can't survive without him because this and that. And for some reason, like, I don't know, it's like she had us all brainwashed. We were in some kind of trance where she was concerned. She was a victim and protect her at all costs. And we always did. We always did, because we thought we needed her, right? Somehow, but she was always really mean to me. And I think it was because I got it the worst out of all my family members. Like, I'm the one that ended up on the streets, got left on Grouse Mountain for dead. I was the worst in the drug addiction. So when she looked at me, it reminded her of all her failures. So she was really hard on me. And the one thing I always tell my siblings, I say, that woman, she did us all a really good favor. And the only thing she ever did for us was teach us how to be strong alone. She taught us to never need anybody, because damn sure when we needed her, she wasn't there, right? So she did do us a favor. We're all super strong. Like we all, and that's the only thing that woman's ever done for us. But she's very sick, and she had us just brainwashed. So, yeah, it was crazy. But after the Grouse Mountain thing, I lost my son to the ministry. And of course, my mom fought for him, because that's another welfare check. She wasn't passing that up. She wanted the money that came with my son. So she did fight, and she did get custody. And instead of trying to help me get better, she got clean and sober, and she fought for my son so she could get the welfare check, right? And so I just kept on, and I kept in my addiction. And then I ran back to Edmonton for some reason. I just had caused so much mayhem here in Vancouver, because by the time I lost my son, I went absolutely crazy. I was on the streets. I wouldn't have a pimp. I was beating people up. I was in the bar. I was drinking. I was fighting. Like I said, I kept trying to stuff the wounds, and I kept bleeding out. And, people were getting sick of my shit. And so I ran back to Edmonton. And when I was there, like, I think I still had my jaw wired. I'm not sure if I just got my wires off, but I went back to work because I don't know where else to go. That's the only place I know to get money, right? So I went to work there. And I think I was high on mushrooms when this guy picked me up. And he picked me up in a truck, and we were going to go to the south side because I had a hotel room there. And so he starts driving, and we're going over, there's this bridge, and then it goes down to Mill Creek Ravine, right? And so he starts driving over, and then all of a sudden, boom, he's going down Mill Creek Ravine, and he starts speeding up really fast. And the alarms went off and the little voice in my head, and I jumped out of that truck doing God knows how fast. My skull hit the concrete. I had road burn all up my body. I knew I wasn't coming out of that ravine alive if I did not
Wow.
flee. So anyway, some people were walking across the bridge, the Mill Creek Ravine, whatever, and they saw me and they came running down. He had turned around. He was coming back for me. But by then the people were running down. So then he took off, and I don't think anyone got his plate. I'm not sure. But when I hit the ground with my head, I got amnesia. I got like temporary amnesia. So the next thing I know, I woke up in the hospital. And I didn't remember who I was. I didn't know anything, but I did know the number. It was my childhood friend, and I knew her phone number. And thank God that number hadn't changed, because her mom's super religious, which is so funny. It's her number that I remembered. But her mom came to the hospital, and then she told the police who I was.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Wow.
and thankfully, my older brother was still in Edmonton, and my poor brother, like, he had suffered so much, and here he was a cook in Edmonton, and he finally got this normal little life, and he had a normal little girlfriend, and they had a nice little place, and then all of a sudden, he's got his badly wounded, drug-addicted sister on the couch, right? And I didn't know who he was. I just knew that he came to get me. And I was on the couch, and I remember my brother likes to read a lot, right? So every time I'd look up, he was sitting in a corner chair reading a book, and he'd look at me to make sure I was okay, right? And just to, and my brother's very serious. He's always been a very serious man, and he was not happy, but he looked after me. And then when it finally, one of the times I woke up and I knew who I was and I was okay. And then my brother, it was so funny because he didn't know what to do with me. So he gave me books. He gave me books. And like, he started me on a reading journey that pretty much saved my life later on. But he started me out with things like Richard Bach, spiritual books. And then he liked epic fantasy. So I started reading epic fantasy. And like later on in life, I don't know how he got an 18-year-old drug-addicted prostitute reading, but he did it.
That's
And
amazing.
It is
and it
amazing.
really saved me. Like, my brother, he was amazing even from when we were little. Like, when we had school concerts, I remember one time I didn't want to go. I knew my mom wasn't going to show up. I knew nobody was going to show up. I didn't care. I wasn't going. And then he talked me into going. And I remember I looked up and I saw him in the back with a little disposable camera. And like, my
Aw.
heart just, yeah. So that's my brother. And so he helped me a lot. And like I said, him getting me with these books and stuff actually did later on save me. It helped me. I loved the epic fantasy. The women were strong and they were heroes and they overcame so much, right? So that did help me. But yeah, like I said, and like, just these incidences, even though they're really big, like, that's not even half of it. I mean, the things I went through just with these weirdos in these rooms, I can't tell you how many times I've been beat up or raped out there, and like, for the young girls now that I don't know. They think that, that they're safe. You never know. Even if you're escorting or you're doing anything, you never know once that door closes what kind of psychopath you're with, right?
Yeah.
So it's very scary. But, so I totally forgot this part. So my live-in sitter, Michelle Harmer, right? So she was devastated. And then when I got left on Grouse Mountain for dead, she was looking after my son. And then my family became involved and they took over the care of my son, and she had gone back to Edmonton, right? And then I didn't see her for years. And then I got off the streets. This is a long story of how I got off the streets, but I had ended up getting off the street, but I started hanging out with all these bikers. They're actually the ones that got me off the street. They kept telling me, "You're too good. You can't do this. Like, we don't want you doing this." And they helped me so I never had to stand on a street corner again. But she showed up at the Cobalt Hotel in Vancouver here, and she showed up with this really good-looking half-black guy, and she told me she was working the streets, and my heart just broke. I was like, no, please don't. And she was like, no, I'm totally happy. It's fine. And, everything's good. And I'm so happy. And not long after, she disappeared without a trace in Edmonton. And I've often wondered, like, the police didn't care. When I went flying out of that vehicle in Edmonton, the police did not give a shit. They were like, they didn't care. They were like, just another Indian drug addicted prostitute, and they didn't care. And it was evident in the hospital. They never checked up on me later. I had a fractured skull. This guy was taking me down to Mill Creek Ravine. And I always wonder if he was like some kind of serial killer there. And, so I've always thought, did I just narrowly escape another serial killer, right? But they don't care. They don't care. And that is so evident. And you look at the cases, like I'm sure you guys are aware of Noelle O'Soup out here. Are you?
I'm not. No.
Okay,
No.
so Noelle O'Soup she's a First Nations girl, and she's like 14 years old, and she had been in the care of the BC Ministry of Children and Family Services, and she had been in care between there and I think Saskatchewan over a 10-year period, right? So she did have family that was trying to, get her back and stuff like that. Well, okay, so the Vancouver police, for one thing, she went missing. The Vancouver police did not even inform the parents that she was missing from this group home. There she is. So they did not make anyone aware. And then even when she was murdered, do you know that they didn't even look for her? And then they found her. This weirdo guy, he was in one of the scummy rooms in downtown Eastside, Vancouver. The police had been in his room a couple times because of the smell. They found nothing. He had 2 dead bodies in that room, and she was one of them. And they had been there because all the neighbors in this, what do you call those scummy places, the neighbors kept calling because of the smell, and the police had been in there, and they missed 2 bodies that he had hiding in there.
That's not right.
She was 14 years old. The police do not give a shit about girls like us. They don't. And I'll tell you. And then Chelsea Poorman, are you aware of that one?
Well,
No.
hold on. Just before we move to that, what's interesting about it was Van Chung Pham that that the girls were found like in that person's apartment. His name is Van Chung Pham. He was actually ordered deported 6 years before the police found her body and the body of the other woman.
Yeah.
So he was known to them.
He was known to them. They do not care. But the same thing with the Picton and all the girls. My friend, Michelle, her daughter Stephanie disappeared. And she was one of the ones where they found ID, but they didn't find her body. So they never charged him with it. And it has killed my friend. It has killed her. Like she's got Stephanie's son now. And it has been hell on her.
Really?
Well, they weren't even the first women to die, to die under Pham either, which is, so he was known.
Right? Okay. And so you pulled up Chelsea Poorman. Are you still here?
Oh.
Okay. You pulled up Chelsea Poorman. So did you know that they said that that it wasn't her murder's not suspicious? She was missing several fingers and part of her skull.
What?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then her cell phone was missing. For one thing, they didn't really look for her. And and it was 10 days before they would even issue a public notice that she was missing. They figured just another Indian gone to party. She had a physical disability and a brain injury. But when she was found, she was missing fingers and part of her skull. And they're still saying it's not suspicious.
When did she go missing?
I don't think I have that written down.
According to this, they did such a good job looking for her that she laid in the same spot for 1 year.
For 1 year.
Before they found her. Wow.
What?
Yeah. So, yep. And then we will, this is horrific, and her poor family. And then there's the Amber Tuckero case. Do you know they reported her disappearance on August 20th, 2010, only to be told by the police that she was probably out partying. They closed her missing persons file 8 days after they reported her missing. They just said, oh, she was gone out to party, closed her case. And her remains were found 2 years later. But the crazy thing about this, and I've talked to Tammy, touched on this, and I won't exactly say what, but anyway, the thing is, when she was in the vehicle, Amber, with her murderer, she got a bad feeling. So she phoned her brother. There was a line for the prisoners in Edmonton, and they recorded the whole conversation. So they have the whole conversation up till right before he killed her. They have his voice. They have everything. And they still haven't found her killer.
Oh my.
They have, you guys listen to the recording. It's insane. They should have the murderer by now, but they don't. They don't care.
People can access the recording?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can listen to the whole thing. I'll tell you, it will send chills up your spine.
Holy shit.
They have the whole recording because her brother was in the remand center, and in the remand center, there's a number that you can call and they record the conversation. So she called the remand center number because she felt uncomfortable. And it tells the whole thing where she's telling him, you better not be taking me anywhere I don't want to go. And he's going, no, we're going to 50th Street. And she's like, 50th Street? Yeah, it records it. The whole thing is recorded up. And then right after it cut out, he killed her. Wow. So the phone cut out. He must have found the phone or something, but the phone cut out and then he murdered her. I am telling you right now, they do not give a shit. They don't care, and it's hard because these are all, like I said in my book that I wrote, and I'll say it again, this is somebody's sister, mother, aunt, we are human beings, and somewhere out there, someone is going to describe us as funny or charming or, our laughter. We are human, and people have just dehumanized girls like us. And it's not just Indigenous girls. It's any girl in that lifestyle. It's any drug addicted girl. And it's not like any of us woke up one day and it's just like, as a little girl, oh, well, listen, I just think I'm going to go, get involved in drugs. Like, a lot of us have been through some horrific stuff, right? And people don't see that. They just see what we're portrayed as, and they just see the drug. They see them at their worst. They see us at our worst, and they just are like, and the judgment comes. But at one point, this was a little girl with hopes, dreams, and goals, right? Yeah. And people don't see that. And I think it's so important to see. But the police are so corrupt. I'm going to tell a story, and I didn't know if I was going to tell it, but I am, just to show the corruption of the police. And the only reason I wasn't going to tell it is because it's super embarrassing, right? So Royce took me to Toronto when I was 16. And he put me out on the corner like he always did, and I knew what to do. Anyway, I got in this guy's car, and I'm a big dumbass at that point. I'm 16. I don't know what I'm doing. Apparently, we had parked to do some bad things, and we were in the police gym parking lot or something, right? And so we were doing something not good, of course, and we heard a knock on the window, and it was a police officer, Toronto police officer. And so, of course, we're caught then, and the cop was like, oh, well, and he scared the crap out of the client, right? And the client drove off, but the cop told him to leave me there, and the cop took me in the car. And then he drove for a bit, and he told me, he said, well, you have to do this for me or I'm going to arrest you.
What?
And I did. And I
No.
did.
Wow.
Yes. And he was an undercover Toronto police officer. And I did it because I didn't want to go to jail. And I thought Royce would be happy, because I avoided going to jail, one of his star girls, and I avoided going to jail, right? When I got back to that room and I told Royce, he beat the shit out of me. He beat the crap out of me because I had done that. And here I thought I was being smart because I didn't get arrested, right?
Wow.
So I didn't know what else to do. I was like 15 or 16 years old, whatever age I was. I didn't know. Yeah. I was like, okay. Right? So it's...
and this was Toronto police.
Yeah, this was
Yep.
Toronto. This was an undercover Toronto police, and I guess where we had parked was in their gym or behind the car. I didn't know Toronto, so I didn't know that was the police place. I'm from Edmonton, right? I don't know. Yeah, and so he took me for a little drive, and then he dropped me off downtown after. Yep. And I was not proud of myself because, of course, I'm doing disgusting things out there. It's nothing to be proud of. But that I didn't get arrested, I thought I did a good thing. I was so excited when I told Royce that I avoided getting arrested. Yeah, he beat me up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he didn't think that was such a good thing. But I was a kid, right? I was a kid. I had no idea what I was doing. But I just kept going because that's what you do, right? You just keep going. And but it's just so bad. Like, the police are so bad, and they will tell you anything. They will tell you that they care and they try to make it. They do not, and the biggest thing is, it always bothered me, and I know it's the United States, but you saw the uproar when Gabby Petito went missing. Holy crap, there was no stone unturned. This middle class girl went missing. They never turn stones for us. Not for the Indigenous, but Gabby Petito. And then people were so mad because they were like, how does she go missing? And every country is in an uproar. Everybody's looking for Gabby Petito. What about all the missing and murdered Indigenous out in the States and in Canada?
Well,
Right?
I think too, part of the Gabby Petito case, because I did follow it a little bit, is that a lot of internet sleuths got involved, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
as soon as, kind of her followers and things like that found out that she was missing, that really started almost like a I don't even know how to say it, like a crowd investigation, right? A fan investigation.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, even looking into the things that I've looked into, I can honestly say I think sometimes the citizen journalists do a better job at investigating things than the actual police do.
100%. I
Yeah,
was under
for
the
sure.
understanding, because I saw the uproar about it all, that the police just were so involved in her case, but I was unaware. Now I'm aware that it was citizens. I just want to touch back on the Amber Tuckero case. I just wanted to say too, where the obvious evidence that the police don't give a damn. They had to issue an apology to Tootsie, to Amber Tuckero's mother, for the way they destroyed evidence. They failed to follow policy. They failed to ensure a thorough investigation. They dropped the ball. And then I watched, because I was so interested in what was going on. I watched and I'm using air quotation marks, their apology. And, when I saw Tootsie walk in with all these strong Indigenous women, I just got goosebumps, and I was so proud. But you should, if you ever have a minute, go and watch the apology. It was pathetic. It was pathetic. And I felt so bad, because here these strong First Nations women supporting each other walked in, and the police were just as crappy about their apology as they were about the investigation. They dropped the ball. She's just gone to party, but they don't care. They don't care. They don't care.
Is that
Yeah.
Vancouver police as well?
No, that was Edmonton and Leduc.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one thing that I've noticed looking into a lot of this stuff is there's also a lot of young men going missing.
I've noticed that too, and I'm so nervous for my younger one. He's 18, and I'm always like, stick with your friends. It is absolutely creepy. They just disappear.
Yeah, and it seems to be very prominent in BC mostly.
Yeah.
But I have spent some time, really looking into this, and I noticed that they try to keep the missing and murdered Indigenous women very far away from the other missing people, the white people, however you want to say it, right?
Yeah.
And my gut is telling me that this is all the same thing.
Yeah.
And I believe that they have purposely created a divide between the two so that nobody puts two and two together.
Yes.
I think you're really on to something there. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
there's a lot more going on than people will see on the surface, and people are
Yes.
hiding things. People in power know things, and they are hiding things, and that
Yes.
there is no way they are not. And you look at it, especially like you touch upon a lot, Tammy, the Picton murders, and like look at that Laura Mershenher tried to bring awareness to Picton and was shut down because and why would the police shut down one of their own officers? Why would that happen?
Because it's a much larger operation than anybody. Well, first of all, that authorities want us to know, and second of all,
Yeah.
that anybody, like as in a regular citizen, wants to believe. He did
Yeah.
not act alone, and
Nope.
I would go to my grave with that. Like,
So I have a friend that survived Picton, and I haven't been talking to her for a while because we got in a little argument over disagreeing views on the transgender issues. So we haven't talked, but she actually did survive Picton. And, I'm sure she would be fine with you reaching out to her. I just won't reach out to her, but she did survive Picton. So
Wow.
I'll
Wow.
give you that information and maybe you can speak to her. I'm not even sure how she did. We lost touch for years. We used to be roommates, and when we were in addiction, we met in a recovery place. I've been in and out of recovery I've been clean and sober for a while, but I've been in and out of recovery all my younger years, right? We lost contact for years, and then we got back in contact, and she does a lot of work on the downtown east side here in Vancouver. But like I said, we had disagreeing things on transgender and children, and I won't get into what, but one is for and one is against. I'm
right.
clearly against transgenders and children issue. I'm fine with, like, I've known a lot of transgenders. I worked in Vancouver downtown. I had transgender friends. They never mentioned children. I'm fine with be you, do what you got to do, but you stay the hell away from the kids. And she just didn't agree on that. And so, but anyway, I'm sure she would be open to maybe talking about what happened to her.
Yeah, I would definitely be interested in speaking with her.
Yeah.
Michelle, how did you get where you are today now?
Well, so what happened is, like I said, I was working the street, but I started hanging around some bikers downtown Vancouver at the Cobalt Hotel. And they kept telling me, like, we love you and you're too good and you don't need to be doing this. And they helped me quit. But then then I was in the biker life. Right? So then I started dating big time drug dealers, right? Like big drug dealers, the ones with the lots of money in the motorcycles and stuff. And I married one, and then I ended up leaving him because he was like a emotional, crazy Frenchman. And I ended up meeting my youngest son, his father. I met him at a nightclub, and it was funny because I only went there because one of the girls beat up my little sister, and I went to beat the hell out of all of them because nobody touches my family, right? So I was still in my drinking. I wasn't prostituting, but I was still crazy, right? So I went to deal with this girl, and I walked in, and oh, good Lord, the bouncer. Oh my goodness. So anyway, I met him, and it was so ridiculous, but it was literally love at first sight. And so we got together, and I'd been off the streets for a while, but he not only was a bouncer, he was a money collector and a drug dealer, right? Yeah, I know how to pick him. But anyway, I loved him, and I still do. God rest his soul. But so what had happened is that we got together, and we were doing bad things. I was still even though I wasn't a prostitute, I was in the drug life. He knew everything about me, my past, and he never judged me. For God's sakes, his dad was a pimp previously, right? So he didn't have any room to judge anything. But we got pregnant. We were back and forth, back and forth. We split up. He committed a murder in that time when we were broken up, and he had shot someone to death. It's a long story, but yeah, we had broken up. We got back together, and I got pregnant right away with my youngest, and it's so hard. We were going to get our lives together. He was going to stop dealing drugs, and I had started taking a course. I started taking a course. I was a counselor training course in downtown Vancouver. I don't know. I was still occasionally relapsing, so I don't know how I thought I was going to help anyone, but it seemed like a good idea at the time, right? So I started this counselor training course, and like my late husband, he got himself into a lot of trouble. He's, he collected. He was a collector, and he wasn't nice about it. But he like, people don't understand this. They say, "Oh, he was this bad guy," but he loved us. He loved us a lot. But he did have his violent side, and he was a big drug dealer. So anyway, I decided I was going to go to school, and he said that once I get that done and he gets everything done, he's gonna quit dealing drugs. And like, we had calmed down in our life. We'd stopped hanging out at the bars. We'd become this little family unit right after our son was born. We were both home by 6-7 p.m. I rarely drank. Anyway, I went to school one day, and we got in a fight that morning, and it's so crazy because like he had things to do. I only went for a couple hours in the morning to this course, and he had things to do that day, and so we got in a fight in the morning, and I got mad and I yelled at him. I'm like, "What the hell? I'm just going to quit school. I'm done. I don't care. And then you can go do whatever the hell you want. I'm just going to quit." And so he was like, "Just go the F to school." So I slammed out of the door, and I was really mad. And I took the bus because I don't drive. So he drives everywhere. And so I started walking to the bus, and I remember I looked down and I saw a penny, and I used to always do this thing, right? Find a penny, pick it up, and all the day you'll have good luck, right? Mm-hmm. That was the last time I ever put a penny in my shoe. I went, I'm sorry, this is still really hard for me. I went to school, and I was there, and I was supposed to meet my mom, who, like I said, we had Stockholm syndrome. I was still talking to her at that point, and I was going to meet her at the bingo hall because, and I know I'm going to get the flack from this, but like any good half breed, I love a good bingo, right? So anyway, I was going to meet her, and then I was at school, and I was on a smoke break, and Matthew, that's my late husband, he called me, and he's like, "The baby fell off the bed." And I'm like, "What?" And then I was panicked because our bed's really high up. I'm like, "What the hell?" And then he starts laughing. He was crazy, but he was like, "I'm just kidding. Baby didn't fall off the bed. You still mad?" He called everyone a fag. I don't know why, but he was like, "Still mad, fag? Are you still mad at me?" And I'm like, "No." And then, "I love you." And then, because we were so back and forth, up and down, right? And then everything was fine. And I said, "Okay, I'm getting out early because I finished all my tests. I'm going to go meet Mom at the Main Street bingo. And that's okay, right? You got Dilly, right?" And he's like, yeah, go have fun. Say hi to your mom." And I didn't tell him that my stepdad had molested me ever, because he would have killed him. So we just, like I said, we had Stockholm syndrome. Everything was a secret. Anyway, so I went to meet my mom, and then I was in there, and I was winning. I was winning a lot of money, and I was waiting, and my mom was late. And all of a sudden, this little voice in my head said, "Go home, go now." And I was like, "What the hell?" And so I tried phoning Matthew, and I kept phoning and phoning. And then I was like, "Oh, he's probably just in the shower. Maybe he fell asleep." And then I start psycho dialing, and there was no answer. And the voice was in my head was getting louder. "Go, go, go home, get home." And so I don't drive. And I just cashed out, and I started panicking, and I started calling taxis. Beep, 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 busy, busy, downtown Vancouver, middle of the day. So I couldn't get a cab. So I started running. And I called my mom and I said, I got to go. I don't know what's going on. I got to go. So I started running and I got down to where you take the bus to the SkyTrain. I'm still frantically trying to call a taxi. I got on the train. I got to Burnaby. That's where we lived. And I got off the train there. And it's about a 20-minute walk from there to my house. So I tried calling a cab again. Busy. And I just started to run. And I kept running and I was running and running. And then when you come up to where our house is, there's a break in the trees, right? We lived in a cul-de-sac and you can cut through the break in the trees to the cul-de-sac. So I'm out of breath and I broke through the trees and I looked and I saw Matthew's truck parked out front and it had some stuff in the back. So I'm like, oh, dumbass, he just went shopping. Everything's fine, right? Everything's okay. And so I was like, and I was relieved and I started slowing down and I started breathing again. And then I walked up the steps and I opened the door and I'm like, hey, babe, I'm home, Matthew. And just deathly quiet, right? Deathly quiet. And I walked up the stairs and I turned my head and I saw our son in a little jumpy. There was one of those car jumpies. His face was beet red. He was quiet. His face was beet red because he'd been crying. He was 7 months old. And I turned my head and my husband was slumped over the couch with a bullet in his head. And he was murdered, and I went into complete shock. I started screaming, and the blood had already settled to the bottom of his body, and I was trying to reach over him and get my son, our son, but I couldn't. I was in shock. Like, that was the love of my life. We were together 13 years and he's got his brains all over the fucking couch. I couldn't, yeah. So I couldn't get my son, and I've never forgiven myself for not being able to pick up our son, right? And the neighbor, I was screaming so loud, the neighbor came and he grabbed our son, and then I started phoning the police, and they were so freaking assholes. For one thing, they took forever to get there. And then they were like, they know his name. They know who he is, my husband. And so they were like, they were more focused on finding out other information than actually making sure I was okay, right? And then the only nice thing they did for me is, like, my best friend said, she saw me on the news and she saw me sitting on the curb with my head in my hands. And I remember that because I remember at that point, the police, the only nice thing they did was they said to me, the news people are here, and if you don't want to talk to them, get in the police car. And I got in that police car so fast, right? I didn't want to talk to the news. But yeah, I was in shock for a long time after that. Like, my post-traumatic stress, man, it is crazy. It is through the roof. I mean, between all the crap I've been through in my life, but that was the one that made my brain snap. That man was the love of my life, and he was murdered in front of our son, just so cold like that. Our son was there when he was shot to death. So yeah, it's been a lot. And after that, like, when I was with him, I kept occasionally relapsing, right? I would, like, we get in a little fight and I would just go off the rails for a little bit, right? And it would only usually last a day and then I was back clean and sober. But I remember the day after his murder, they finally let me go from the police station. They were doing good cop, bad cop with me. They were, they'd send in the nice cops and then they'd send in the freaking I hit, and those guys were just dicks, right? And I wouldn't tell them nothing because I didn't know nothing. I mean, God, my husband was a collector. It could have been anybody. I don't know nothing. And they still haven't caught his murderer. And anyway, so they finally let me go. And I remember I went to my mom's house because that's, of course, I couldn't go back to the house he was murdered in. So, of course, I had to go to my mom's, which my stepdad that molested me is still there, still living there. So I went there, and my mom, she had this, like, 2 living rooms, and it was an ugly old house. But in one of the living rooms, there was a little love seat and a couch. And I pulled them together because that's where me and my little guy slept, right? And I was laying on the couch and I just looked at his little face and I knew I was done. I knew that I was never going to let nothing hurt him, and that now he only had me, right? And so I had to get my shit together, and I damn sure did. I did. And, he's such a great kid. He is so respectful and kind. I was very bubble wrapped him. And, unfortunately, I have horrible post traumatic stress. But the one good thing that did for me is it allowed me to be home to raise my son and get help on disability because, of course, with what I've been through, I have horrible post traumatic stress. But I was able to be here for him, and I quit the drinking and the drugs altogether. And, I did have, I'm to the point where I can have some wine or a couple beer now, and I don't do what I used to do. But for the first 8 years of his life, it was just all him. And so he went all through, like he had ADHD and we struggled, and I was always fighting with the schools over him, and they tried to get me to medicate, which I would not. I tried it for a little while, and he told me he wanted to drink bleach, and I was like, yeah, we ain't doing that no more. So that stopped. And then he has just done so wonderfully. It's like he outgrew it. He worked at McDonald's all throughout high school. He graduated with a whole bunch of certificates. He records. He's a musician.
Wow.
He has his own clothing line. He's just the nicest, coolest kid. So I'm so proud of him. And my older one, unfortunately, when I was left on Grouse Mountain, the one that my mom took custody of, he struggles. He spent most of his adult life in prison, and I feel so responsible for that. Like, he tells me not to, and we're still working on our relationship, but my mom took him, and she effed him up just as bad as she effed the rest of us kids up. But I was too sick to fight for him. Like, I didn't straighten out till I was 37 years old. And one thing I want to say, too, is like Calgary, before I got back and got pregnant with my younger boy, I was homeless in Calgary for a while. And like I said, Calgary is a very prejudiced place. But for any girls listening that are in addiction or struggling with that street life, I went through Sunrise Treatment Center in Calgary. It's all Aboriginal. It's a Native treatment center. It was beautiful. It was just amazing. There is hope. Like, there's hope. I went in and out of recovery. I tried so many times, but you can't give up. You can't give up, because you know what? One day the light bulb's going to go off, and one day it's going to get better. And I bet you right now, if 36-year-old me could see 55-year-old me, she'd be so proud. She'd be so proud of us, right? Like, she would just, and to see what I've done with Dylan, with my younger one, she would just be like, because I was homeless, and I woke up on the Bow River in Calgary. I think it's the Bow River. I got kicked out of the women's shelter for drinking. Then I got kicked out of the worst shelter in Calgary for fighting. And I fell asleep on the river, and I woke up and I saw the YWCA sign. And I went there, and I broke out in tears, and I told the lady behind the desk, I'm like, I can do better. I know I can. I just need somebody to help me. And they did. And they got me into recovery. And then I went to the Sunrise Treatment Center. And, I did end up relapsing a bit after that. But, once it's really ingrained in you, when you are ready to quit, all the things you start remembering, like, play out the tape, and one drink is never enough, and things like that. Things that you think are so dorky when you're sitting in those meetings. You're like, oh my God, if I have to hear that one more time. But when you're ready to get clean, it all comes rushing back to you, right? So there is hope. And I never thought I would get here today. Grade 7 education. I housekeep when things get scant, when we don't have money. I go scrub toilets, and I'm totally fine with that. I have control over that. So with my post-traumatic stress, I'm still, like, some days I have a hard time leaving the house, but it's manageable. But and I've been on a 4-year wait list for counseling. Like, they don't care. Our mental health is so bad. And like, I had a counselor a while ago. What they do is, when you don't got money, right, what they do is they you have to wait on a list and wait, and then you finally get a counselor, and then I'll see a counselor for 3 weeks, and this was years and years ago, and then they're like, oh, sorry, I'm going to work with children now, so you got to go to a different counselor. So it's like I was just having
Wow.
to tell my story over and over again, and every time I did it, I felt like I was just leaving there exposed, and then they do nothing to put the worms back in the can before you leave, right? And and it was horrible. And for me, I have spent, since I've been like 16 years old, there's been an alarm going off in my head that nobody has a code to. I don't have the code. And that's what post-traumatic stress is, right? It's like this constant alarm and nobody knows the code to shut it off. I'm still on a wait list for counseling.
Wow.
So it's like the help isn't there. The mental health, especially here in BC, is horrific. They don't want to help. They don't care. And so, like, you know, it's, and I remember I used to be able to get into detox like that. I would just, when I was like 19, 20, like every man I've been with has been like, oh man, you're psycho. We got to clean you up. Because I was bleeding, right? And I was crazy. So they would put me in all kinds of treatment centers. I've been in more than I don't even remember how many I've been in. But I used to want to, if they wanted to get me, I'd go to detox right away. They used to have the old psychiatric place in New West here, and you would just phone them, and the next day you'd be in detox. But all of a sudden, all those resources are gone. Why?
Really?
They want us to die on those streets. They don't
Wow.
care. You can't get in detox. You're on a wait list to get in anywhere. You're on a wait list for counseling. I've tried to help people with their addiction and get them into a recovery place, and had one of them actually get arrested by the police for mental health. They put him, he was like psychotic. He was thinking that when he got vaccinated that they put a chip in him and that the police were tracking him, and he was always peeking out the windows. So he got arrested, and he got arrested under the Mental Health Act. He was right out the next day with his crazy ass, right? They don't care. They're not helping.
No, it's almost like it's by design. And
Absolutely.
I know I see it where I'm from as well, in Ontario, where you know, you see tons of them on the streets, and oftentimes you can, I mean, you know, you can tell that there's some mental issues there. You know, they're walking down the street talking to themselves or screaming and into nothing, and the
Yeah.
police don't do anything, and
Right.
they just get left there. And I do deal with that a lot in my job. And oftentimes, you know, somebody will be arrested and they're let right out again. They don't try to get them help. They don't do anything for them.
They don't at all. They want these people dead. And like I could go off into many different things. Like I always find it suspect when they rolled out the vaccinations, they offered it to the Indigenous and the elderly first. Like what the hell is that, right? There is a reason behind everything.
And the
Everything
diabetics.
is planned out, and the diabetics, right? It's all population control. They do not want to help people like I was. They just consider us trash. And you know what? We are not disposable. Speaking of disposable, look at the Winnipeg landfill. They wouldn't search it. They won't search it because they believe we are disposable, right?
Yeah.
They don't care. And that's a hard one because, you know, I look at my life now and like, I know I'm a loving, kind person and I would 100% help anybody I could. Like, you know what? My mom, she only said one nice thing to me in my life that I can remember. When I was with Matthew, I was going to kill myself. This goes back to how I now believe in God. When I never believed in God really before, I was up and down on it, but I was going to kill myself. We were doing a lot of bad things, Maddie and I, and I was sick of seeing people getting beat up. I was sick of the drug life. I was sick of seeing people get tortured and hurt, and my heart couldn't handle it. And the only nice thing my mom ever said to me is she said, "You know what, Michelle, your heart is too big for this. You're not going to be able to live this way forever." And she was right. I couldn't. I was so sick of it. I was going to jump out of the car and kill myself one day. We were driving. It was my 30th birthday, and we were going downtown to the Hotel Vancouver. We had a limousine company. We had a lot of money. We were drug dealers. But we had a little limousine company. It only had one limo, but we still had it, right? So we were going down to get my cake, and then we were going to come back, get ready, and we were going to go to the Hotel Vancouver for this party. And we were driving down the highway, and there was traffic everywhere, and I was sick. I was sick of it all. I was sick of the lifestyle. I was sick of being the tough guy. I was sick of seeing people get like fingers lopped off, getting tortured. I was sick of it. I couldn't stomach it anymore. It was horrible. And I was going to end it. I was just going to end it. And I had it in my head, and it was raining. It was cloudy. And I grabbed the handle. I quietly unhooked my belt. I grabbed the handle, and I was going to go flying out the door. And all of a sudden the clouds broke, and the sun came through, and there was the most spectacular rainbow I've ever seen. And in a split second, a feeling of peace and love just washed over me. And I've heard people describe this, in anyone that you hear that has had this experience, it's like a love so strong that words will never, ever come close to describing. And it went right to my soul. It went right into my soul. And, I knew then, and then a little voice, I just heard a voice saying everything's going to be okay. And I turned to Matthew, who had no idea what was going on. He was just driving, right? And I just looked at him, and I started crying, and I'm like, everything's going to be all right. And he's like, what the hell are you talking about, right? Because he had no idea. But that was a change for me. And that's when I realized there's something out there, and whatever it is, it's a lot bigger than I am, and it's absolutely beautiful, right? And I'd like to say at that point, I cleaned up my life and I got better, but I didn't. But, I had to go through a lot more, creator, whatever you call it, needed for me to go through a lot more to get to where I'm at right now. But it made darn sure that whatever I was about to go through, including Matthew's murder, that I had this experience to carry me through, right? This rainbow experience of where I saw the rainbow and the feeling of peace and love. They knew I was going to need that to get through his murder and all the other things that happened afterwards, right? I knew Matthew was going to die. It's hard to explain, but I knew. I had a dream. And I won't get into the dream. It's just a long process. But in the dream, I looked, and there was this oval-shaped mirror, and I was alive on my side, but the girl in the mirror, the Michelle in the mirror, was dead. And I woke up, and it was so realistic. And I looked, and my sister was there, and I looked at her, and I said, I'm dead now, aren't I? And she was very sad, and she said, yes, you are. And Matthew died not long after that, but there was other things along with that, spiritual things that I knew he was going to die, and it would take too long to explain. I've written all about it, but I think, and the mirror image where I was dead on the other side, it was like the universe telling me something inside me was going to die, whether it be, my love or the lifestyle or things like that. But the dead me, that was gone, right? And Matthew died not long after that. But the dream was so realistic. I woke up, and my face was soaked from tears. And
Wow.
yeah, it's they, like I said to you, Tammy, what do they say? There's more in heaven and earth, Horatio, right? There are things that I can't explain in my life that have brought me to this place. And there is something out there, and it's much bigger than us. And Tammy, you had said to me, you said, I explained to you how I still, how someone like me could believe, because I didn't believe in anything. But after that experience, I just believe that we all came here to experience something, right? I've got this story, and it's called The Little Soul in the Sun. And so the gist of the story is, so there's this little soul, right? And all it knew itself to be was the light. It knew it was grand and beautiful, but that's all it was this gorgeous light and happy. And so it kept bugging God, I want something else. I want to, this is all I know. I want to experience something else. And it kept pestering God until God finally said, okay, little one. So You want this? Are you sure you want this? So I'm going to send you to another realm, and I'm going to circle you with darkness. I'm going to circle you with darkness. And when you're encircled by this darkness, don't cry out, don't get mad at me, but remember who you are. Remember who you are. You let your light shine. You are the light, right? And that made so much sense to me, because I kind of believe on some level that we all came here to experience something, right? Because what else would explain all this darkness?
Yeah.
Right? Like, why do children starve? Why, when I was a little girl, why would God let a little girl just cry all night and wish to be born to different parents? My siblings, why would he let them go hungry and get beaten and cry, just wishing to be born to different parents? Why are children murdered, and why do they get sexually abused? And like, it's hard. So you have to kind of come to some type of understanding, or I did. And it rings true for me that we came here with our own experiences in mind, and we are all the light. We are
Yep.
all the light. And, don't cry out when you're surrounded by darkness, be the light. And so that's why at the end of my book and on my profiles everywhere, it says, and the little soul said, I am the light.
I love
I
that.
am the light.
I love that.
Mhm.
Thank
Michelle,
you.
I have just a quick question about your mother. Where is she now? And
Well,
do you talk to her still?
okay, so this is so funny. Like a few months ago, about 8 months ago, she had taken a fall, and she still had us in her, all of us kids in our, like, what did I call it? Our Stockholm syndrome, right?
Stockholm
She
syndrome.
still
Yeah.
had us, having sympathy for her, having to go look at the pedophile every time we wanted to see her. And so she took a fall at work. Now, she's always been mean to me, but like, you don't know me. I have this big heart and I want to help everybody. I always want to help everybody. Anyway, so she had this fall at work and nobody was going to help her. And so I went over there, and I was helping, and I was there for about 8 hours. And then my stupid pedophilia freaking stepdad, he started snapping at me. And I don't know what happened, but something inside me finally broke. I don't know, something. I was like, why the fuck am I even here? And like, I don't know. And it's funny
Oh
because
wow.
one of my siblings came over, and I looked at her, and I went out for a smoke, and I said, I'm done, you take over. And then all of a sudden, it's like, I don't know, it's like the clouds broke, and whatever spell she had over us, it completely broke for me. And at the same time, my sister that was there, it broke for her too. And then as a ripple effect, it happened for all of us. My brothers didn't know that he had sexually abused us. We kept that from them. So we finally told them,
Wow.
because my mom, she was a master manipulator. She had me and the other family members, she had us keep her secrets. And so all the time we're feeling bad about ourselves, and we're carrying this poisonous secret because she had us so manipulated. And
Mhm.
like, we had so much low self-esteem, and she had always convinced us that somehow we needed her. But I never told my brothers, and other family members, they never, because my brothers would have just lost it. But now they know. And so the whole family. So anyway, so now what's so stupid, okay, is we went to the police to try to find out why files got closed after, they didn't find him, so they're just going to stay the charges. Well, we didn't know why the charges got stayed. Do you know that trying to go to the Burnaby police and getting access to our own files is insane? Like,
Oh.
we were wondering why. And, like, it goes to the back of your brain, because after we initially went to the police in Burnaby and the ministry, and they just never came around again. So we're like, okay, we're still we're still out in the ocean with no life jacket. Nobody cares. Nobody has come to save us. So we just went on with life, right? Like we do. because life is survival. And when you're on the streets and you're in our situation, as us kids were raised, with a horrible drug addicted parents, and when you're in that situation, you just survive. You don't think about the details, you don't do nothing. But after we all broke from this recently, other family members have decided to charge him now. They are still living together. These old people are still living together like nothing happened.
Oh,
None
wow.
of us kids are talking to them. We've all seemed to have snapped out of this. And, like I said, the boys aren't to be at fault. They did not know. They didn't know. So, I mean, but they always had Stockholm syndrome with our lifestyle. Like they went hungry, they went hungry. They were like, we would have drug addicts, prostitutes, bank robbers in our house. There was always people nodding out at the table. My mom, she would get the shit kicked out of her. And like one time, we called him Uncle Henry. He was dating my mom's best friend. She was 8 months pregnant. He was beating the crap out of her. And I took his cowboy boot. I didn't know it was his, but I started bashing him over the head. I was like 11 years old. And I'm bashing him over the head with this cowboy boot because he's beating my pregnant so-called aunt. And, he finally got off of her. And then later he laughed at everybody saying, you got to watch that little one. She's crazy. She beat me with my own boot. Like we grew up with that stuff. So my brothers always forgave them. But once they heard about my stepdad Stan molesting us, then that was it for them. So now none of them are talking to them. But yeah, as far as I know, there's a few family members still trying to bring up charges. And now they're old, right? But like honestly, Stockholm syndrome is real. People will say it's not. It is. Like these are my mom, since we were old enough to talk, has been manipulating us, right? So
Wow.
yeah.
Unbelievable.
So like I said, it's been quite the walk for me. But it's I'm out of it now, and still it's residual. Like I actually, before I did this podcast today, I had to tell my 18-year-old, he had no idea I was sex trafficked. And he's been through so much, and he knows that I was molested by my stepdad, and he hates them. He is such a good kid, but I had to tell him that right before I came on here. He is just the coolest kid ever. He said, Mom, why are you ashamed of that? Like, honestly, like this man took advantage of you, and you had nowhere to go. And like, I just was crying. I'm so lucky I have him. But I had to tell him that before I did this, because like I didn't want him. He had to find out about his dad's murder through Google, because I kept putting off telling him, because he'd say, what happened to my dad? And I'd be like, your dad had a bad heart. Your dad had a bad heart. And then he Googled his dad's name. And of course, like the papers, because my husband was a biker and drug dealer, they're like, oh, Hell's Angels associate murdered. And then he comes down and he's like crying. And he was like, was my dad a Hell's Angels? I'm like, oh my God, Dylan. No, the papers just like to sensationalize everything. Your dad wasn't even close to any Hells Angels members, right? So they had nothing to do with nothing, but the paper will have them. And so now my son thinks his dad was a Hells Angels, right? I'm like, oh my God. But that's why I said I didn't want him to find out by Googling things this time. So
Yeah. No, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for talking to us tonight.
You're welcome.
Honestly, I'm blown away, and I knew a lot of this stuff, but actually hearing you talk about it was hard.
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
I am teared up now, I'll be honest.
Mhm.
And there was points where I was crying throughout this. So I don't know if everybody else is in the same boat, but it was
Yeah.
Me too.
You're going to
was
make me
hard.
cry.
Yeah.
It's I just want to make sure I did a good job, because if there's any girls struggling out there that may somehow hear this, I just want them to know that, that life doesn't have to be forever, and they're not alone. And don't be ashamed. Like, I spent so long ashamed of myself, for everything. And like, I hated myself because I was so filled with shame. But I'm beginning to understand that, I didn't have control. I have control now with what I do. But back then, I was just a little girl. I was a girl. And there was no protection. And this
Yeah.
is so many people's story, right? This is for so many people from
Yeah. Well,
abusive. Yeah.
these traffickers, they're professionals. This is what they do, right? They make sure that they find vulnerable girls and play on their, like you said, like their weaknesses or whatever, their
Insecurities. Yeah.
insecurities,
Yeah.
and they manipulate them. Like, this is what they do. They make sure you feel like you hate yourself. Like, that is, they are professionals at doing
Absolutely.
that, and this is why. And then I think even today, I went to a human trafficking seminar not long ago, and they're like, because I know it's not like the sex worker today is technically not like what they're doing is not illegal, like they won't be charged or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But these traffickers, like, they convince these young girls that they're the ones that are doing something wrong, right? So they're even afraid to go to the police.
Yeah.
Because
Absolutely. And the thing is that they tell these girls they're protecting them. Those girls are
Mhm.
completely alone. They're only protecting them from other pimps. And
Yeah.
like I said earlier, but it's so hard because these girls, even if they're in escorts or anything, they're not safe. Once you close those doors, you don't know what kind of psycho you're getting there. And I don't know. I understand why girls do this because I did it myself. And sometimes you feel like there's no other way. And sometimes it's just because you like the money, which is totally cool, right? Do what you want with your body. But they need to make safe spaces for these girls to go where they don't have to have pimps and they feel protected because, girls are going to do this. This profession is as old as time, right?
Yeah. It's
Find a
true.
safe space for them, and I know people are like, oh, that's immoral and whatever. Listen, we all nobody in glass houses can throw stones. You can't judge because one person decides they're going to make their living this way. Yes, is it the most cleanest, best thing? No, but a lot of girls just decide to do it because it's going to pay for their school or it's going to, but there needs to be safe spaces for these women for whatever reason they're doing it.
Yeah.
They're still human beings. But then the part that pisses me off is the clients. I don't know. It's such a hard one because, like, if in a perfect world, we just rid ourselves of all these perverted men, or we
Yeah.
would just have them not be perverts, right? But
Exactly.
it's not a perfect world. So sex trafficking is going to happen. Sex work is going to happen, and try to make it safe and get those pimps out of there. Like,
Yeah.
just these girls, they think, like I thought all through my younger years, that I couldn't work without a pimp till I got left on Grouse Mountain. Then I carried around a knife, and if a pimp came at me, I was like, I will cut you. I have earned my wings. I am not giving another loser in a Cadillac my money ever, ever. And then I learned I could fight because they're not really so tough, right? They're not really so tough. They just like to scare the girls. But I was ready. I would beat up their girls out there if they tried to beat me up because I didn't have a pimp, right? I got to that point after I got left on Grouse Mountain for dead. I was like, you people are not going to tell me what to do. Where were you? Where were you there, pimp, when I was being strangled and beaten half to death and dumped in a ravine? What the
Yeah.
hell am I giving you money for? Where the hell were you? You
Yeah.
weren't there. You know who was there? Me. You know who almost died in that ravine? Me. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And then that's another thing I'll just quickly say with Joseph Hammond, when he confessed, they dropped my attempted murder to assault causing bodily. That made me so mad. That man dumped my body in a ravine and admittedly dropped rocks and brush all over me so I wouldn't be found. He thought I was dead. Anyway, yeah, I
How
just had to get that out.
dehumanizing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so that bothered me. He threw
Yeah.
everything on top of me to hide my body, but I didn't die. I
Wow.
didn't die. So, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
I honestly, I don't even have any words for your
Yeah.
story. I'm so glad that you were willing to talk to us. I think it's such an important story to be told. And I
Thank you.
pray that anybody that is needing to hear this hears this.
Mhm.
You know,
Me
and
too.
that it helps people. I think one of the most important things that you said tonight was, just about recognizing that these people are humans too. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes we
Yeah.
get so tied up in our lives, and it's easy to maybe drive through a city and see people on the streets and just think, what are these people doing?
Yeah. How horrible are they, right? But you have no idea what led them to be where they're at. And
No,
I
you
just
really
want to
don't.
say I'm so grateful for the work you ladies are all doing, all of you are doing. You know, when I first saw you, Tammy, and I saw how hard you work at bringing awareness, I was like, I really need to reach out to this woman, and y'all should be so proud of yourself for bringing this awareness. It's a beautiful thing, and it needs to have more attention. So good on
Definitely.
all of you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm just so glad you came to talk to us. You're just such an amazing human being. And
Oh, thank
I'm
you.
so glad that you're alive today to tell this
Yes.
story.
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you all for being so patient while I blundered through that.
No, it
You
was
did a great job. A great job.
Yeah.
You
it was
really did.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Um,
Yeah.
Well, before we get going, I'm just going to let everybody know this was actually our last episode until we take a break for August. So we will be off all of August, but we will be returning, I believe, September 2nd.
Yes.
Is that correct? Yes.
Correct.
Yeah. Expecting,
Just making sure. And we have another very special episode coming for September 2nd. Well, we'll be recording it September 2nd. It'll be out, I don't know when, shortly after that. But Dave, I'm going to let you explain what this next episode will be.
I'm taking over. We're having Mark Slapinski on the show. No, I'm joking. Nobody run away. Nobody run away. Nobody run away.
That's it. I'm out. I'm out.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I'll 45 seconds. I'll tell the story. So a few months ago, I randomly asked you guys, "Hey, if I can get so and so as a guest on the podcast, can I hijack the show and host it for one episode?" Because like whatever, I have my own video thing. And I just come here to hang out. But like I'm never expected to host and never whatever. So of course, you guys are being the legends you are. You're like, yeah, you can host if you can get this guy on. So on the side, I was talking to Tammy, and then I'd be like, okay, here's what's my strategy is going to be. Here's what my campaign is going to be to get this guy to come on. So eventually, me talking about it had Tammy's responses sounding like, okay, so do it. So like it's time to start putting planning into action. And like those weren't like actually her words, but like she always believed in me. But like the only thing that was left was to turn words into actions, right? So shout out to everyone that liked the retweets and posts and stuff on X, especially the dudes from the Big Puff podcast. So on September 2023, September 15th, I went to London, England by myself to watch David Icke speak. And on September 2nd, 2024, he will be a guest on the Broadcast podcast. Let's go.
Oh, yeah, baby.
So yeah,
Awesome.
David Icke.
Awesome.
Dave got us. David Icke. That's fucking awesome. I can't wait.
Mic drop, baby.
So that will be our returning episode, which is so cool. So
Yes.
everybody stay tuned for that. Suze, final thoughts.
Yes, just some final thoughts to Michelle. Michelle,
Hi.
I'm first of all, I'm so sorry to hear about all the trauma and abuse and everything that you dealt with for so long. But I am very happy to hear, where you are today and what you've overcome.
Thank
I
you.
can't even imagine how hard your story must have been for you to tell it, but I am so glad that you have found the strength to tell that story. And I really hope that it will help other girls gain strength for themselves to, tell their own stories, get out of the life, and turn things around for them. And I also hope it opens people's eyes to really see what is really going on. So thank you so much for that.
Of course, and thank you.
Ash, final thoughts for you.
I'd just like to say that I really appreciate you having the courage to tell us your story today, Michelle. The things that you've shared with us are just so awful for somebody to have to endure. These are issues that need to be addressed, but I understand how difficult they would be to talk about. So thank you so much for shedding light on the terrible things that are taking place, and also how horribly our systems are for letting people fall through the cracks. We're supposed to have
Yeah.
support systems in place to help people get out of trouble and get their lives back on track, but clearly there's a lot of work that we can do. Hopefully conversations
Yeah.
like this one can help to raise awareness and get more support for those who need it most. And I really, really respect you for your vision of hope, and just how the way that you were able to turn your life around and show that to others so that hopefully they can do the same is just, it's really beautiful. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you all for having me on. I really appreciate it. It was nice. And you guys are so patient and kind. So thank you.
Michelle, one thing I do want to mention just before we go is you've been writing a book.
Yeah.
And do you have plans to publish your book?
I do actually. I sent it off to a publishing company and was unaware that they are more focused on the transgender stuff. And so, of course, I was refused. And then I started telling myself it's because the book's not very good. But I'm going to keep working. I know it's got some rewrites, but I'll tell you the title, which I think is so cool, and why I named it that. It's called A Red Dress for Dragonfly. And the reason I did that is because, of course, you're all aware of the red dress movement started by Jamie Black to bring awareness to the missing and murdered. And she chose red, the color red, because it represents not only violence, but vitality. And it's an angry color, but the red dresses, that's why you can look up why Jamie Black, I believe her name is, chose the red dress and started the movement. So the red dress, and then they hang the red dresses because they say that in Native culture, red is the only color the spirits can see. That's why the red dress too. Red is the only color the spirits can see. And then the dragonfly part is because in Native culture, they believe that the dragonfly is the soul of a loved one come back. So that is why a red dress for dragonfly. It's like the dragonfly is attracted to the red. It's the only color he can see or
That's
she
beautiful.
can see.
It is
I love
beautiful.
Right? Yeah. Soul of the dead. Yeah.
Well, I for one hope that you do get it published, and I think you should also just consider self-publishing because that's a thing now. We're in 2024 and it's very doable. But
Yeah.
I can tell you, I will be first in line
Oh, thank you.
to buy one of these books. And so, I hope that that's something that you do in the very near future. And please keep us looped in on, how you're doing with that. And, just once again, thank you so, so much for coming and sharing your story.
I will for sure keep you in the loop, and thank you all again.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank
Well,
you.
everyone, that is our last episode before our August summer break. And we will be back to see everybody in September. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.